And let's say you're taking apart a wall, and you're taking apart a wall. Listen to the case, everybody. You're taking apart a wall, and the wall that you're taking apart is going into an area that people generally don't frequent. We're talking about an area, a garbage area, that by the daytime, people don't usually use it for a bathroom. But there are people on occasion that will use it as a bathroom, the Gemara said. And if you go ahead and you take down the wall during the daytime, when nobody's really expected, because generally people don't use that area for the daytime, and he was throwing the stones into knocking the wall down with the hammer or whatever, into that area, and somebody was there, and somebody gets killed. So we say, good morning, Mr. Haber. So what do we say? We say you got to go to Golut. The person has to go to exile if he killed a person unintentionally under such a circumstance. Is that clear? That's the case of the Mishnah. And the Gemara says, but if we have, so to speak, witnesses, we know for sure that when you threw the stone into that, you were knocking the wall into that area, at the time that you were throwing the stone, the person was not there to the spot where he got hit eventually. He walked into the stone. It doesn't take a long distance to walk into a stone. The person walks 2 feet, he could be walking into a stone. So a person could throw something in the air for a second or two. In that time period, a person can actually walk into the stone. He went into the direction that the stone was going. And if he would not have walked from the time that he threw the stone, Michael, welcome back, good morning. If he would not have walked into that spot, if you'll take a picture, a video, go to the videotape, the moment he threw the stone, it would not have hit the person. Where the person, the victim, where he was at the time the stone was thrown, at that point where the stone, when the stone was left the guy's arm, it was not going to hit him. It was only because he walked into that area that the stone actually hit him. So that we say, you are not chayav, do not go to exile under such a circumstance. And some explain it's a special gzeret hakatuv, it's a special decree of the pasuk that says, in that case, you don't go to exile. Michael, I want to make it clear. You hear the case? When you threw the stone, the person wasn't there. You were not going to hit the person. But as a result of his walking further, it hit him. So we say, matzah, the case of the Torah is that when you're chopping wood in the forest and something went flying, either the head of the axe, according to the Chachamim, or piece of wood of the tree, according to Rebbe, went flying, and matzah, it found his friend. It met the friend. So the Gemara understands, one of Mr. Rappaport, that the word matzah means you found someone that was there at the time of the movement of that axe. You found something, it met the person that was in that spot. Meaning to say that the spot that you threw the axe from, when it hit him, he did not have to he didn't move anywhere. He was in that position at the time that the head of the axe went flying. So the Gemara is using the word of the Torah when it says umatzah, it found him. That means it found him. He was there at the time when the axe, when it left the hand of that person. Not that he came to that spot after the axe was thrown, that he was always there at that spot from the beginning of the time of the throwing of the axe. That is what the Gemara is saying. So what the Gemara is doing, is interpreting the word umatzah to mean that the thing is there, that the item that it hit, the person that it hit was there from the beginning. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara brought a question on that. Well, that's where we got it. That's where we ended up yesterday, morning Nathan. And we're going to start with the Gemara on Chetam and Aleph. We're going to we'll go to the Tanur Rabbanan. We're going to go back a couple of lines. That's where the piece begins. 5 lines into the wide lines on 8a, and in the Art Scroll, it's found Art Scroll 8a, most probably 8a3. 8a3 in the 3rd paragraph. Okay? Is that clear? Michael, you got it? Mr. Safdie, you got it? So we're going to go read through this point that we just said. Tanur Rabbanan. Umatzah. The matzah, the Torah stuck in the vid, you have it in the Gemara? Umatzah, it says, Mars, you got matzah, prat lemamsias atzmu. The word umatzah, it found him, is excluding someone that he found himself. He himself moved to that spot. Umatzah means that the axe, the person who was doing the axe, he found one Akiva. He found the other guy. Not that the guy moved into the item and walked into the place of fire. Rather, I who was throwing the axe, I found him. Not that he found it. Umatzah, that's how the Gemara interprets. Mikan, from this here, from this word of the pasuk, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Yaakov, said the following: if mishayotza ha'even miyado, if after the stone left his hand, hotzi hala, the other guy, the victim, puts out his head, esrosho, he puts out his head into the line of fire. It wasn't there. His head wasn't there at the time the guy started throwing. He moved his head, put his head there, the kibla, and received the stone, and it hit him. Patur. The Torah is exempting the guy who threw the stone. Again, we're talking about he threw a stone in an area that he did not expect people to go. Not that he threw a stone that people, the case will be that the Torah is exempting a case where he threw a stone in the place that the Gemara said you don't expect people to come. And you don't expect the guy to be there at all. But the fact that people sometimes go to use this as a bathroom during the day, generally they don't use this area, the specific spot as a bathroom, but sometimes people do use this, and therefore in general, if you would hit somebody, you would go to exile. Because it's some level of negligence. But since in this case, it would not have hit the guy when you threw it, so now that now that it hit him because he moved into it, you will not have to go to exile. Is that clear? Is there any question of what we're saying? Mr. Haber, is it clear? Very clear. Okay. What? Yes.
In what case could you be throwing it so slow or in such a way where the person can come in pat?
Like I said, an item, a stone in the air, you can have 2 seconds in the air. Hit by a pitch that is. But again, we're talking about the guy just move his case. He just moves his head. If the guy is standing like this, the axe won't hit him. The stone won't hit him. But what does he do? He goes like this. He moves into it. How long does it take for a guy to move his head into something? It's not going to hit him. The ball, the axe will go just boom, will go straight ahead, like a dart going right over here. Now, no, he moves right into the spot of the item. And that's the case. The Torah says you're exempt from going to exile. Some understand the Gemara because if you move your head into it, that's something that the guy, maybe that's called a total accident, but Others say, no, it's not a total accident, because the fact that you were in that spot and people sometimes go there on occasion, therefore it's not really, it's normal that a person moves his head into something, but rather the Torah exempts in such a case. The Torah does not obligate exile in a case when you threw something in an area where it's not expected that people should be, and plus the guy went ahead and moved into it. What's that again? Okay, there might be some form, there's still a small amount of negligence. See, some learn that's not negligence. But there's two ways the commentaries learn this behavior. Some learn it's not negligence because the guy moved into it. And others learn no. At the end of the day, if he would not have moved into it, you would go to exile. Why? Because the fact that some people go to this area during the day, most people don't go to this bathroom during the day. In fact, there are some people that use it on occasion when they're really stuck. So therefore, you would need to be careful. There's some level of negligence that you shouldn't be throwing stones and knocking your wall down into a spot that on occasion some people use. So based on that, and therefore, if you would throw your stones into the spot and the guy did not move his head into it and you hit him, you would go to exile, correct? So why, by the fact that the guy put his head into it, why does that really make it that there's no negligence? I would still think that the fact is he's in a spot that people sometimes use on occasion, that there should be negligence whether he moved into it or he didn't move into it. You know that people go to the spot on occasion. Hear what I'm saying, Mr. David? Therefore, I would say it's just sometimes call it a legal exemption. Even if the Torah is exempting him from going to exile, even though you can make a strong case that there's still a level of negligence, a small level of negligence, which in general you would go to exile if someone kills someone inadvertently when there was a small level of negligence. But in this case, the Torah is for some reason telling us that since the victim himself walked into it, in this particular situation, we're going to get you off the hook, so to speak, from going to exile. Because your action, when you threw it, you would not have killed him at that moment. He needed to move his head into it. Okay? That is, if anybody have any questions, because this Gemara was a little tough yesterday. So anybody have any questions? She said the Gemara was tough, but some people had questions on it. Okay, is it clear? That's point one in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to challenge this thing that what we just said now. The Gemara says, Limemra, you mean to say, you're saying the matzah, that the word umatzah, you're interpreting the word umatzah of the Torah to mean me'ikara mashma. That means from the beginning, that the thing was there. When you say the word something found something, you found something that was there, that was always in that spot. That the axe found the person, and not that the person found the axe found the person. The person was there when at the time of the throwing of the axe. Not that he moved into it. Not something new happened. No, rather it met its destination from before. Uraminu, I have a contradiction. Matzah. We have the same word in the Torah, matzah, in a different context, in a different situation. What's the situation? The Torah has certain laws when a person sells. We're going to focus today on the Gemara. Is going to focus. Good morning, Yaron. Baruch haba. The Gemara talks about a person sells. Good morning. It's a sedei achuzah. What's a sedei achuzah? A sedei achuzah. It might be a. You know what? Here, right here. You got one? Okay. A sedei achuzah is a field that you got from your ancestors. The tribes, the land of Israel was divided up to the tribes, and each family, based on how, they did a lottery and based on the numbers of people, there's a whole process how they divided up the land of Israel. And the fields that were given to you from the original division, splitting up the land of Eretz Yisrael. Let's say you're from the Shevet of Ruvain. If a person was poor and he sold his field, it's a bad thing that you sold your field, but he needed to sell his field because he needed to raise some cash. The Torah says there's a special law. Besides the fact that the field, you can't sell that field forever. Good morning, Mike. Look who's here. It's great to see you. You can't sell the field. You can't sell the field forever. You only can sell the field until Yovel. Comes the Yovel, the Jubilee year. In England, it's a big year this year, for the Queen, 70 years. There's a whole thing going on. But our big year was the Jubilee year. Good morning, Ariel. So the field goes back to the original owner. So in a certain sense, the sale, let's say if Yovel would be in 30 years. So in a certain sense, you're only selling the field for 30 years. So everybody knows what's going on. It's not like a trick. Okay, Yovel comes and now the buyer gets, cheated because the field has to go back. The buyer, the seller knows that if it's a field, if we're talking about a field in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land, that you got from your ancestors, that you divided up the land of Israel was divided. If you say that the field is only going to be able to be sold until Yovel, a certain amount of time. So now you sold. So let's say Yovel was 30 years from now. So and I'm selling a field from my ancestors that we got. I know that the field was for $30,000. So we know it's like $1,000 a year, because we know it's 30 years. So it's a time-sensitive point, as David says. So it's $1,000 a year. So for 30 years. Now, if let's say after I sold the field, Mike bought the field, 10 years after I sold it, I was able to afford. I was able to make some money in the 10 years. And now, what's the value of the field after 10 years? Now it's $20,000 the value, because I sold it for $30,000, which is $1,000 a year. 10 years was already used. So now it's $20,000 value. That's how we look at the value. $20,000 value left in the field. Now, I was able to make $20,000 in those 10 years. I go over to Mike and I say, Mike, you have to sell me back the field. If Mike says, I don't want to sell you back the field, no, the laws are you have to. No, after 10 years, if I was able to go ahead and get money, if I couldn't get money in those 30 years, comes Yovel, it comes back to me. I didn't, because it's only a 30-year contract. But if after 10 years, there's another 20 years left on the contract, on the 30-year deal. After 10 years, I raised $20,000. Mike has to sell me back the land. One of the 10 commandments, which we read about on, what did you say? The value of the, but this, it seems like there's like a set, we look at the original price, we divide it into how many years, and that's the value. How much the land produce, how much, based on the abilities of the land to produce grain, how much, and that's how much the price will be. The original price was $30,000 because that was the fair market price that we understood based on the ability of the land, how much it produces. But in general, there's one of the 10 commandments is lo sachmo. What is lo sachmo? Don't covet, don't want something that doesn't belong to you. I'm not allowed to pressure you to sell something. I can't tell somebody, you know what? Either you sell me the property or I snitch to the government on you. What do they call that? Blackmail? I don't know what they call that. But even though I'm going to give you the fair price, I'm going to give you exactly the market price, but I want you to sell it to me. If you don't sell it to me, I'm going to get you. And so if I'm going to force you to sell me a property, the Torah says that is a violation of the 10th commandment. Even though you paid full price, Michael, right? That's you can't force somebody to sell you something he doesn't want to sell. You want to give him $1 million, well, you're not forcing him. He's happy to sell it to you for $1 million. But if you're going to do something to him that he does, you're threatening him with something or something of that matter to sell you something that he doesn't want to sell you, but you are pushing him against the wall using any tactic that even though you paid him full price, that is a violation of the Torah. That's his property. What did you say?
What if you have a seller and he's going to come up with creative ways to sell it to you?
Again, but the question is, did you pressure him to do something he doesn't want to do? That's the question. If you push somebody again, if you go ahead and you give him a nice price and you make him understand why or you somehow were able to go in and explain to him that it makes sense, we're good. But if the reason why he says yes is because he doesn't want to sell it to you, but you're using certain tactics that was forcing his hand. You're forcing the guy to sell you the property. That's one of the 10 commandments. It's his property. God gave it to him. He didn't give it to you. If it's meant for you, you'll get it. If he doesn't want to sell it to you, you can't push him to the wall, push him against the wall and say to him, you have to sell me the property. The Torah says that you can't, anything that belongs to your friend. You can't. So this land now belongs to the buyer, but he bought it. The buyer has it because he bought it for 30 years.
Okay, so let's say the buyer was part of the seller, like that owned that land, from the lineage, like after 50 years, the land goes back to
The seller, it was originally an ancestral land that belonged to the seller. The
okay,
seller got it from, right,
he needs money, sells it to Shimon.
yes.
And then now Reuben wants it back.
Now Reuben wants it back.
What if the land
No, again, in this case, again, here, listen to this case. But the case of the Torah is that Reuven owned the land. It came from the tribe of Reuven. It was an ancestral property. He sold it to Shimon. And now the Torah says Shimon has to sell it back. If Reuven now comes up with the funds, Shimon has to sell it back. He can't say no. So then there's different laws. Then we have to see the laws. But we're not. We're going to focus. Yeah, yes, but we.
Shimon for 50 years. Okay, and Shimon doesn't. The land doesn't belong to him. And Shimon, 10 years in, there's 40 years left. He can't afford it. He sells it to Jacob.
Because we're going to have to see. We have to look over. Okay, we have to look up the laws of. There's different complicated laws here. Which type of properties we deal with? Ancestral property has one laws. Non-ancestral property has different laws. So we're going to try to focus on just on the ancestral properties for today. Okay? Yes, anybody have a question? The original seller. The seller sold his property.
But that seller, that the Torah doesn't say that seller himself doesn't own the land forever.
That's very good. That's another law by Shemitah. Nobody owns any land for anything, right? But the Torah is talking about the seller can't sell the property. Can't sell the property forever because of the idea of Yovel is going to come.
So it can keep the property for.
The seller can't sell the property.
That will value expiration.
Expiration, he has to come back. Right. Right. So here the Torah here does something, and he says the buyer must sell it back. Here the Torah says, right, exactly. Here on the Torah says the seller, the original seller, if he gets his money, he raises money, he could go ahead and buy back the property, and the seller must sell the property, which is not the usual. Usually a seller is never forced to sell a property. We're not allowed to force to sell a property. You can't force the guy to sell a property that he doesn't want to sell. But in this case, the Torah says he has to sell back. These are the terms of the original sale of the buying. When you bought this ancestral property, the seller has the right to redeem it.
Very much understood by the buyer.
What's the deal? These are the terms of the deal. And there's another term of the deal that the first 2 years, the seller can't redeem it. The first 2 years, there's another terms of the agreement. If the seller will come up with the money in the year, he can't get it back within the year. No, I'm saying, meaning if he sells it for 30 years, let's say Yovel sold it 30 years from now, and then 6 months after he makes the sale, he hits a windfall of money. And then he wants to go back to the buyer. He says, I want to redeem it. Let's say a year later, he wants to redeem it. He can't redeem it yet. He has to wait a minimum of 2 years before you. If the guy bought the property, you have to give the guy at least 2 years of use of the property, and then you can buy it back after 2 years. You hear that, Nathan? After 2 years, then we can start redeeming the property. That is the case of the Torah. Now, the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, but what happens? The seller had multiple properties. He had a property that was usually a property that's close by it's considered a very good property. A property that's further away is not such a good property. Close to the city. As we say, what do we do in Birkat HaMazon when you give when you say Birkat HaMazon, when you're a guest with somebody's, what do you say? Say it again. Right. We say Birkat HaMazon, and we also say there's a special blessing for the host. The guest gives a special blessing for the host. What does he say? At least I can say what the Ashkenazim say. It's not what the Sfardim say. We say Harachamon, and we say the Nechosav Krovim Le'ir. You have that in your text? Morris says we got it. The Sfardim got it too. Yeah, okay. Yes. The brach is your song. What do we say? Shelo yevush balabayit balamazeh v'lo yevush balamabo. Right? V'yu nechasav Krovim Le'ir. Everybody says that, everybody? His property should be close to the city. You give a blessing to a guy that his property should be close. He shouldn't have such travel time. And if his property is close to the city, you're able to see what's going on much more often. It's much easier, it's much better for the person, the holder of a property, when there's easy access to the city. But people live right near their fields. You know, there's a flood, there's a problem. You see, you're on top of it much further, much easier. Right. I mean, it would mean anywhere. Exactly. Anywhere you live. Yeah, investment properties that you own, fields, properties. It's always in your advantage, generally speaking, that it should be closer to you. The closer to you, you have more supervision, and you're able to help the situation much easier. Then, right? Correct? Now, good morning, Mr. Feldman. Now, the guy has two properties. He has a property further away, and he has a property close by. And let's say he's going to sell, and let's say he's going to get more cash. Let's say he's going to get a certain amount of cash for his property or let's say it's easier to sell the property that's nearby. It's always, let's say it's a property that's easier, or let's say it's a better property. He has two properties, similarly, one's a better property than the other property, and he sells the better property, or he sells the property that's nearby. But at the time that he sold the property, and this is ancestral land, he had another property. He had another property, but he didn't sell that other property. And let's whether it's right, whether it's ancestral or not ancestral, he has other property, but he didn't sell it. So at the time that he sold property number one, he had property number two. He owned two properties. So now comes 2 years later, he sold property number one, and now he wants to get property number one back because property number one was his best property. And he goes ahead and he sells property 2 years from now, he sells property number two. With the mindset, I'm going to sell property number two. I'll take the proceeds of property number two and buy back, let's say in our case, it's 30 years to Yovel when he sold property number one. It was a $30,000 for the deal. 10 years have passed. He's got in 10 years, he got $10,000 worth of the property. The buyer has gone. Now there's $20,000 left to the contract. And he had property number two was worth, let's say it was worth $30,000 at the time that he sold property. When he sold property number one, he had property number two also worth $30,000. Could he go now and sell property number two and take the proceeds from property number two and say, I want to redeem my property number one? Morning, Mr. Feldman. We're dealing with, the Torah says when you sell property that you own, you got from the ancestors, when they divided the land of Israel, you have a right to buy it back, even if the seller doesn't want to. That's a special allowance Torah gives in such a circumstance. Residential. We're talking about residential and exactly. This is residential meaning it's your resident, it's your land. Now we're talking about the focus of land. There's also certain laws regarding houses, walled cities, not walled cities. It's all different laws regarding these cases. But here we're talking about a guy. So the Gemara says the allowance that you have a right, and you have a right, the terms, as Mr. Haber would say, that of agreement that the Torah creates the terms. Good morning, Yosef at Tzaddik. I don't know if I gave you a proper good morning.
Yeah, it's funny enough, in New York City, there is also a law that if a person went for a foreclosure and they already closed on his property, even after up to 2 years, he is allowed to come and redeem his property and rebuy it back again.
Again, if you sell something, the buyer has the right. I don't know if everybody will agree with that. That's true.
No. This is the law. If you've been foreclosed, okay.
Oh, foreclosed. You're saying.
Foreclosed. If you've been foreclosed on your property, and before the 2 years end, you're allowed to come back and redeem your property. Obviously, you will have to pay if there is any improvement for the property. You will have to pay for all the improvement been made. And also the seller will not come empty-handed, basically. He cannot sell it in profit, but he will sell it whatever he put in, basically, and whatever it costs. But
they got it from the Bible. They obviously got it from the Chumash. That's where they got it from, Yosef.
I guess so,
It's probably an old law on the books.
Yeah.
My father of blessed memory, talking about laws on the books, my father of blessed memory was involved in a very big case by the blue laws. My father was open on Sunday. He had a meat store, and they gave him a ticket. He says, I keep the Sabbath. I'm closed on Sabbath. I'm open on Sunday. They gave him a ticket going back to 1950, 2 years ago, everybody, right? Look up the case. My father was Sam Friedman, people of New York versus Sam Friedman. So look it up. You'll see it. It's a famous case. And they gave him a ticket, and he had a lawyer. They went to the highest court in New York State. By the way, I don't know if maybe people know what's the highest court in New York State, the Court of Appeals, not the Supreme Court. He went to the highest court in New York State, and they said, you lost, but my father said he won. Why? They said the remedy lies in the state legislature. Change the law. The laws from the late 1800s or whatever it was, they said they have to be closed on Sunday. You can't sell retail. But if you change the law, then you'll be fine. As a result of the case, they got national publicity. They changed the law. Therefore, you could buy or sell retail food on Sunday, meat and that stuff. He was in the meat. He had a little butcher shop. So that is that. But sometimes the laws based on the books, the old laws, they found it wasn't unconstitutional. They said it was discriminatory, and the court said it's not discriminatory, but change the law. Okay, so sometimes it's the old laws on the books. So these and our laws is the. And maybe Nathan will send it to the group, maybe at the end of after the class. We'll send the people of New York versus Sam Friedman. Okay, it's a good case. Anybody interested in looking up the case? It's a nice case. So going back to our Gemara, if the guy has two properties, at the time that he sold property number one, he had another property, but he didn't sell that property. He wants to sell property number two. He wants to sell property number two later on to redeem property number one. Since he had access to property number two, when he sold property number one, since he owned property number two, he cannot later on say, I'm going to sell property number two, and then use the proceeds and go to the buyer and say, you have to sell me back my original property. What? But he can't do that. Because since he had the ability to sell property number two at the time that he sold property number one, the Torah doesn't give the allowance to say you have a right to force the seller to sell you back to redeem that first property.
The only property.
Right. The deal works that this is the only property that you had, or you have another property that's not able to, not the amount of this, for the first property. Right. It has to be right. It was probably would have to be a highest value property. Correct.
But with the years, maybe property number two can redeem property number one. Let's say in our case, after 15 years, let's say only 15,000 left. Right.
Right.
After 15 years.
Right. 50,000.
maybe now with that amount, you can sell property number two.
It could be, but for sure, if property number two was the value of property number one at the time that you sold property number one, the Torah does not give you the right to say, to force the buyer to, you have to sell it back to me. Yes,
Because this is an act of desperation. That's what they're trying to help.
right,
Someone's down on hard times and they have to sell their property. Right? Then they sell it. You're not supposed to sell your excess property.
right,
If you have to, then you sell it. So if you have two properties and you're selling, it's not an act of desperation, you have two properties. And if you have one property and you sold,
Makes sense.
you're able to redeem it, something similar to that's why it's the foreclosure loans, right? If your house is foreclosed on, then you can come back and get it, not if you just sold your house or a property.
Then you have another one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an act of desperation, right?
right.
Makes sense.
Very good, very good. So the Gemara says, and how do we know this? The Gemara says, because the pasuk says that you umatzah. The pasuk says that if you went ahead and you found the ability to go ahead and redeem your property, you could go redeem your property. And the root umatzah over there obviously means now you got it. Now you got the ability to redeem it. It wasn't there before. So we see that the root of matzah over there means something, it just happened. It was something new. It came, not that it was always, you always had the ability to redeem it. It's something new. So the Gemara, that's the Gemara's challenge. So we see the root of matzah doesn't mean that it was always there. The Gemara before said that the root of matzah, when it comes to exile, the case of the Torah understands it means that it was always there. That when the axe went flying, the guy was in that spot at the time that the axe went flying. Not that the guy moved into the area of where the axe was flying. The guy was there at the time when the axe went flying. So matzah by exile means he was there already. And on matzah, we see over here, it doesn't mean it was already there. It was only when now you've got something new that happened. It wasn't there before. So the Gemara is questioning the interpretation of the word umatzah. You told me that umatzah means that it was already done, it was already there. And here we see the word umatzah does not mean it was already. It's only something new happened. He finally got funds that he did not have availability before. So that is the Gemara's contradiction. Does the word umatzah mean something that's always there? Umatzah means that it just became there. That is the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara answers, it all depends on the context of what the pasuk is talking about. You could have a word that could mean two different things based on the context of the psukim. So the Gemara is going to answer, when it comes to exile, the context of the pasuk showed us that it's talking about something that was always there. And therefore the Gemara is going to say that's why the matzah means it was there before, not if the guy now walks into it. And the context of the field, selling the field and redeeming the field is now something new that happened. And that's what we'll see tomorrow. We'll just read the words of the Gemara inside tomorrow. Now we're going to go pray. Have a great day, everybody. Beautiful crowd. Thank you all for coming. Look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Have a great day. Yosef and Sadiq, have a great day.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you. Have a great day
Take care.
too.